In 1918, sailors returning from Dakar on the west coast of Africa stopped off their boat in the port of Recife in Brazil. They were sick, and within 2 weeks, new cases were being reported in Rio de Janeiro and other Brazilian centres. Authorities, sceptical of reports coming from Portugal and the rest of Europe, did little to make provision for the arrival of the Spanish flu. The outbreak was fast and ferocious. One witness of the events in Rio de Janeiro wrote that the number of sick individuals wasn't as astounding as the fact that every single person was sick, and there wasn't a way to help, to treat the sick, to transport food, to sell goods, to fill prescriptions, that is, to carry out the most essential tasks of collective life. Health and medical services failed, along with basic essentials like food supply. Public order broke down. The streets were chaotic, with looting and panic. Scenes of social breakdown, whilst a common trope of disaster films, aren't as common as one might believe in crises. So what do we know about our behaviour in crises? And what has coronavirus revealed about our social psychology? Professor Sir Simon Wessely consults governments on how to respond to the public when a crisis arrives. He suggests 3 basic principles: don't give premature reassurance, don't tell people not to panic, and get doctors and scientists on television as soon as possible.
When we give advice to those who have to communicate with the public, we always tell them, whatever you do not tell people not to panic. That's one of the 3 golden rules of risk communication. Because those who are panicking aren't listening to you. Those who aren't start to worry that they should be. And anyway, most of the time, most of the people don't panic. So we say never use the P word in your public communications.
As we know from those who've survived the horrors of war, crises generally inspire people to work together, provided they receive clear messaging from experts and leaders and the sense that the government is acting within their best interest. People are generally motivated toward action in a crisis such as an epidemic.
Historically, we live in an anti-collective culture where, on the whole, we have been told that groups are bad for you. The story we've nearly always had is, the individual is rational when alone, put them in a group, they panic, they become a mindless mob, and so on and so forth. And a lot of our work has been showing, well, no, people don't become irrational, they don't become mindless. What they tend to do is they shift their sense of self from the individual to the social self, and they shift the norms and values which guide their behaviour from one's own idiosyncratic norms and values to those of the group.
As social animals, altruism is a powerful motivator because instinctively we understand that our chances for survival improve with the greater well-being of our communities. But on an individual level, what psychological mechanisms are at play? Disease outbreaks present us with a classical dilemma for social response, the tussle between looking after the needs or self-interest of the individual, the I, or that of the greater collective, the them and us. And the choice is driven by one of the 2 basic instinctual responses, fight or flight versus tend and befriend.
At the moment, so many of us are anxious, and we feel the anxiety as a desire to run away, escape, hide, or combat the problem.
Fight or flight is a primal response to threat and has a physiological base, preparing one to take action to ensure individual survival. Cortisol floods our brains and causes us to hyperfocus, making it harder to look away from a potential threat. But it's not particularly helpful in the context of coronavirus because it reduces our capacity for empathy, for calm rationalization, and makes us more vulnerable to extremism and other hyper-tribal thinking.
One of the things that happens in pandemics over the whole of human history has been the repercussions of stigma, prejudice, violence, and fracture against the groups thought to have caused it, the groups who somehow escaped it, those who've been treated, the groups that don't feel they've been treated fairly, that we aren't all this together. And then you have long-term repercussions, and sometimes in human history, extremely violent.
Alternatively, with tend and befriend, we respond to danger by tending to ourselves and our families and befriending others so as to build social networks of mutual assistance. It's a far more pro-social response to threat and emphasises our interdependence with one another.
In any disaster, and especially a large-scale disaster, quite frankly, the state is not big enough to look after us. There aren't enough police officers, fire officers, care workers and so on. We need to look after each other. And therefore, the formation of mutual aid communities and groups is critical. And that, again, is facilitated by a sense of shared identity.
According to the Collective Psychology Project, there are 3 particular factors that will inform these responses: the degree to which we feel agency or the power to shape our lives, our sense of belonging or connectedness to others, and our conscious self-awareness, or our ability to choose and analyse our own responses to things happening in our lives, rather than instinctual responses from the amygdala, or the part of the brain that deals with threat and pumps cortisol.
The problem with the amygdala is that it doesn't make a distinction between what we imagine and what is, which is a problem. So we feel distressed if it might be that something's going to happen, just as much as if something is happening. However, if it is happening and the rest of the brain recognizes it, then the amygdala is quiet. No anxiety. So the one thing I can say to people who are anxious to start off, and I always do, is that your anxiety is about what might be. Right now, you're okay. Otherwise, you wouldn't be feeling it. You wouldn't waste your energy to feel it.
Many of the positive actions we've witnessed during coronavirus are built on tend and befriend. Clapping for our carers, Italians playing music on their balconies, hundreds of thousands of volunteers signing up to help the NHS, Captain Tom Moore's 100 garden laps, and the daily work of healthcare professionals on the front line. All of these acts make us feel like we belong and give us a sense of agency. But what about some of the negative behaviours? In the early stages of the outbreak, many flouted social distancing advice, from spring break to Bondi Beach to revellers in parks and bars. One possible explanation is our poor ability to assess risk, which is driven by many factors but includes our tendency towards optimism bias. Humans are naturally optimistic thinkers. Most newlyweds believe they're invulnerable to divorce. Most smokers think that they're less vulnerable to cancer. A research poll completed in late February of around 4,300 people in Western Europe found half of them believed they were less likely to get coronavirus than others. Additionally, people were poor at framing the virus in terms that could be understood. Early commentary frequently featured comparisons with seasonal influenza. On the 9th of March, President Trump made a tweet comparing the annual mortality of influenza to the number of confirmed coronavirus deaths in the US. Experts, including Dr. Fauci, soon corrected the comparison. Coronavirus has a mortality rate 10 times that of influenza and presents a much greater threat. COVID-19 is a novel pathogen with its own unique characteristics and outcomes. Our normal mechanisms for making predictions didn't work because nothing before in our lives has happened like this. And that's why we make comparisons with diseases like influenza despite discrepancies. Early reports also emphasised the greater threat to the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. We now know that whilst this is true, coronavirus can affect both the young and old, the healthy and the ill. In addition, the practice of social distancing is just as much about protecting others and the broader community as it is about protecting oneself. Understanding all these factors hampered people's ability to process the risk. Panic buying was another behaviour that drew criticism. Stories of empty toilet paper and pasta shelves in supermarkets contributed to our collective anxiety, as people had been informed there would be lockdown measures, or worse, the chance of self-isolation for up to 2 weeks.
If you were sitting at home, you were getting information telling you, here's a scarce resource. It's about to be locked down. Loo roll is kind of useful to have in such a situation, and you're told that other people are irrationally buying it up. Now, in that situation, it is entirely rational for you then to go out and say, well, I need to get some before it's all gone. So what people are doing is responding entirely sensibly and reasonably to information about the behaviour of others. If there's anything dysfunctional here, it's not the psychology, it's the dysfunctional information.
The problem arises when people feel they're sacrificing whilst others are benefiting. It increases anxiety, motivating a person to become more selfish or overestimate what they need. That's part of the fight or flight response, and is also driven by another mechanism, the law of scarcity, frequently used in marketing and advertising. When we believe a product's sold out or the inventory's low, humans interpret that to mean the product must be of greater significance or quality.
The reason why an increase of 10 to 20% in sales leads to empty shelves, nothing to do with psychology, everything to do with the just-in-time supply systems, which mean that nowadays, unlike 10 or 20 years ago, the stocking is very fragile. If it goes up a bit, then you begin to have empty shelves.
Once it was clear that supply chains were still in place, the buying calmed. Another example of near panic was the rapid crash of the markets. Humans are highly receptive to other people's emotional and mental states, and the trading of stocks is highly speculative. Movements on the market are deeply influenced by collective uncertainty, and once the selling commenced, it was like a charge through our collective central nervous system.
Our behaviour is as much determined by what we think other people think as what we think ourselves. We're not talking about irrationality. We casually use terms like panic. We're talking about inferences about the behaviour of others. And of course, in the market, then the behaviour of others is precisely the phenomenon that is critical in and of itself, which makes it even more sensitive.
Later, as the government stepped in with measures to reassure confidence, market panic alleviated. When a global crisis arrives, our broader master narrative about the world around us collapses. Our outlook and understanding of the things happening in our lives is turned on its head. This is why public presentations with leaders and scientists, doctors and experts are so important. They provide reassurance and help us craft a new narrative to navigate the changing world and the threat around us. Alternatively, the vacuum in narrative can be exploited by conspiracy theories, which proliferate in crises.
Conspiracy theories are nothing new. They were far more common before the era of social media. Everyone thinks, they were invented by social media, but that's blaming the medium for the message. If you look at the tracts and pamphlets around the Great Plague, or even before printing, you will see that misunderstandings, conspiracy theories accompanied the Black Death and its multiple reoccurrences.
The thing about groups is they are the best of worlds and they're the worst of worlds. If we create an intergroup division and we have a sense that we are being attacked by another group, then the group can become truly pernicious. And again, in pandemics, there is a history whereby outgroups have been blamed for what's happening, and that has led to great violence. And so, for instance, huge numbers of historical studies say about the rise of anti-Semitism during the plague, during the Black Death. On one day, I think it was Valentine's Day, 1349, 2,000 Jewish people were burnt in one day in Strasbourg. And that was part of an ethnic cleansing, of a genocide that killed more than 500 Jewish communities in Europe.
Because viral outbreaks are an existential threat, conspiracy theories can offer a source for blame and a place in which to direct action. Usually, the theories we gravitate towards tell us a lot about ourselves and our confirmation bias. But rather than decreasing anxiety, research shows it actually increases it, along with an even greater sense of disillusion and powerlessness.
There are some adults who are absolutely certain that they have discovered the theory of everything. They often have high degrees, but they're usually loners. They're usually very distant from other people. They don't have a way to verify what it is they think they know.
Conspiracy theories offer a physical threat too, from spikes in xenophobia and violence to potentially harmful medical advice. During the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, conspiracy theories in the US suggested that undocumented migrants were being exploited by terrorists to spread the virus, whilst outside of America, some theories argued that the virus was purposefully being spread by American authorities to benefit pharmaceutical companies. From the perspective of our social psychology, Conspiracy theories foster distrust in experts, the government, science, and the science community. People turn to sources of information that polarize viewpoints or proliferate fake news. The greater struggle against a viral outbreak is undermined once segments in society silo, fragment, and distrust the information they're receiving, which has an impact on the drive to tend and befriend or to work together.
It's not a sense of helplessness, which makes you vulnerable, but rather a sense of agency that makes you invulnerable.
So far, coronavirus has offered a wealth of its own theories, from early suggestions that it was an overblown invention by media groups to sway political interests, or that pharmaceutical companies have introduced the virus to manipulate the market and make gargantuan vaccine profits, or the claim that 5G is a technology built to transmit the virus.
The twin problem of conspiracy theories is, number one, they help turn the positives of the group into the negatives of the group. They lead from the inclusive we to a divisive we and they. And secondly, they avoid our own responsibility and our own complicity in these problems and project them onto that demonic other. So they are truly corrosive of the things we need to get through the pandemic effectively.
As lockdowns to battle the viral outbreak are extended globally, concerns regarding mental health and ongoing isolation are mounting. Studies have been done on the psychological outcomes of people who were quarantined during outbreaks of SARS, H1N1 flu, Ebola, and other infectious diseases. Many individuals experienced both short and long-term mental health problems, including stress, insomnia, emotional exhaustion, and substance abuse.
The thing that all mental health issues have in common, be them depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, from one extreme to another, is that they lie to you and they tell you that you're a freak, and they tell you that you're alone, and they tell you that no one understands what you're going through. I think it is. I think it's absolutely, normal, more than ever, to be feeling weird right now.
A meta-analysis of 70 studies that followed 3.4 million people over several years found that the likelihood of dying during the study increased by 29% for those who were socially isolated, or by 32% for those living alone. The secondary effects of the pandemic, recession, social unrest, unemployment, could trigger even wider mental health challenges.
The group, and feeling part of a group, is probably the most powerful health prophylactic we have, probably much more powerful than virtually any pill that we've discovered to date. That sense of community, that sense of us, that sense that others are there to support and help you, leads you to believe that you can cope more, that it reduces stress, and that has implications for both mental and physical well-being.
Connection is so important in keeping us well. We know that just human touch and hugging can bring our heart rate down. There's all sorts of reasons why we do this. And I think instinctively, and I know that there's a lot of other people who have had experience of mental illness who felt this, that I've spoken to, that at the beginning of lockdown, we felt quite prepared for it. And we were like, we've been waiting for this our whole entire lives. We thrive in isolation. But actually, it's the things that we really don't want to do that are actually really important in keeping us healthy and well. And I'm not talking about, extreme things. I'm talking about little things like meeting up with someone for a coffee that you'd rather not, and all of that. And so when you strip out all those little daily interactions, and even the things that you do want to do, you quite quickly find yourself going into that default depressive state.
We need to manage our mental and emotional states, not only for our own well-being, but because our inner states affect others around us. And that's the point to social psychology. The state of the world affects our state of mind, and our state of mind affects the world around us.
This won't last forever. I mean, it'll, and we'll learn something from it. It's shown us our vulnerabilities, and that's not a bad thing. It's something that will bring about huge social change, and not necessarily just for the worst. The only behaviour you can change is your own. Actually, you can't change people around you. And as long as you're doing your best, that's enough.